Welcome to the Saga of the Clone Saga, podcast presented by the students of S.H.I.E.L.D. We're reading and talking about the entire infamous 1990s Spider-Man Clone Saga. My name is Vincent Faust, and who do I have with me tonight?
We've got Mike.
And Billy.
Thank you, guys. In this episode, we're looking at the Lost Years miniseries, filling in some more Ben Reilly backstory. And it's actually important stuff this time, or at least that's the premise. Nick is not joining us tonight. Do either of you want a sponsor you'd like to shout out?
I'd like to sponsor Batman, The War in Jokes and Riddles, a book that's far better than I'm going to be reading after we're done with this.
All right. Thank you to DC Comics. I'd also like to note that this is kind of a new era in this podcast, as we are all back at school. Obviously, the students of S.H.I.E.L.D. is Penn State's Marvel Club. And so Mike and I are actually broadcasting from the same building, in fact, because we are roommates.
We might be 20 feet away from each other.
And so some of us have a change of scenery. You can see I also have a little bit of some DC Rebirth sponsorship in the background. And Billy is struggling it out in the Commons. All right. So Spider-Man: The Lost Years, it's a 3-issue miniseries. It also had a 0 issue, which we didn't need to read because the 0 issue just recollected the 2 story arcs that we talked about on the past episode. And this series, the publication date for the first issue was August 1995, which is actually like a year. It's about a year and some change, or actually a bit less than a year after the start of the actual Clone Saga, which was in October &94. And we'll get to that. And the story is written by DeMatteis and penciled by Romita Jr. And that was also the team on the second of the 2 stories we read last episode. So what did you guys think of this overall?
It reads like a bad, hard-boiled fiction novel.
Yeah. It's I mean, it doesn't have Spider-Man in it, so that's pretty good. But yeah, it was kind of weak.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on it. Like, I think artistically, I enjoyed it a lot. Even though, I mean, we've talked before, Romita Jr. is pretty divisive, and this is, his style evolved over time, and this is a certain era. But I enjoyed the art. I enjoyed some of it, but it's definitely not as monumental or good as I was kind of hoping, because this is actually one of the Clone Saga is obviously this giant thing, but there are tons and tons of tiny story arcs within, and that's how, for the most part, how we're going to break up the episodes and everything. And this is one of the few story arcs within the Clone Saga that a lot of defenders often point to and be like, oh no, the Clone Saga sucks, but the Lost Years is good. And so I was a little bit disappointed. I've actually read this story before. This is one of my few exposures to the Clone Saga. In fact, I'm not sure when it came out, but there was a paperback, a trade paperback collecting this miniseries that came out shortly after the Clone Saga, and I had that at some point. In fact, Matt, one of our occasional co-hosts, he has my old copy of that when I upgraded for some reason, and that paperback actually has a pretty interesting forward by DeMatteis, where he talks through the Clone Saga and sort of admits that it was a mess. All right. So the setup to this, there's more rain. All of these issues, I think it's raining a lot, which is enjoyable to me, because that's one of Romita Jr.'s kind of stylistic strengths. So how are you guys feeling about Ben Reilly as a character, since this is kind of the first time that we're seeing him mostly on his own and knowing sort of who he is?
I don't hate Ben Reilly, but he's just kind of there. It seems like, actually, what it kind of reminds me of. I don't think Billy's read any of Peter David X Factor, but I don't know how far you got. You got to the part where like Madrox finds out he has the one dupe that's a priest and has like a family and stuff.
Not really, but I'm familiar with the story.
Okay, it kind of reminds me like that. It's just another Peter Parker that just could be hanging around doing his own thing somewhere else, but like obviously that Madrox isn't like flung into having to be a superhero. He just kind of hangs out.
Yeah.
But like this is just like I just kind of feel like just let him be. Like I don't know why he's constantly having to be thrown into action. But it's whatever, really.
I don't like how, I don't know if you wanted to address this later, but they constantly, like in Kane and Ben's like narration, they keep saying that Ben's the actual Peter Parker, and I'm pretty sure they like eventually that turns out to not be true.
Yeah.
So like that kind of
So
that annoys me.
Yeah, that's a major thing that pops up in the captions throughout this book, and that's just kind of a side effect of when this miniseries was published. Because as we move on, we will see that that was the initial setup, was that Ben Reilly was the real Peter Parker and Peter Parker's the clone, and then they committed to that, and then they eventually backed out on it. But the reverse is actually pretty later on, but we'll get to that. And it's just, especially because of the reading order, because we don't know that yet. That's not been referenced yet. It totally stands out. Like if this were in publication order, it would sort of make a little bit more sense. But yeah, that if you're reading this standalone or in this order, that totally sticks out like a sore thumb. Ben Reilly, we were talking about this on the last episode. He's kind of embracing a mullet of some sort. He also rides a motorcycle. So he's kind of just like an angsty 90s Peter Parker.
Actually, he mentioned like he's a nomad. I actually would just be kind of cool if like Ben Reilly just kind of became nomad, but with better powers.
Yeah. It's like he looks more angsty than Peter Parker did, but he's much less of a dick. So
yeah, we don't really see Ben Reilly be much of a dick. You could argue like some of his like at the very end with Jake, where he kind of like knocks people unconscious like twice, but so he doesn't get too much into trouble.
And he's innocent, so
yeah. So this story, I thought it was kind of interesting. This story is set in Salt Lake City, Utah, and like there's references. Like some of the major characters are Mormons. Well, really, one is explicitly stated as a Mormon, and there's a little bit of like questioning of faith and everything like that, which is, I believe, is something that James DeMatteis does in a lot of his work, especially like his more indie work. So it's kind of interesting to see that in a Spider-Man book, because you don't necessarily, like, obviously you'd expect that in like Daredevil or something. You don't necessarily associate Spider-Man stories with faith that often.
It's kind of weird with Romita's art. This reminds me a little bit more of Man Without Fear, just because costumes in it and he's fighting mob.
Yeah, I was thinking that, especially the fact that he has the like. I mean, he doesn't have a costume, but he has like the
like a makeshift one.
Yeah, the like wraps stuff, which is very reminiscent of Man Without Fear. And I believe Man Without Fear was like 2 years plus or minus before this miniseries.
Interesting note, just to say on the cover, is that this issue does not say Marvel Comics. It has Marvel Select up in the corner box.
Oh, yeah. I have no idea. I think that might have been like a weird little imprint maybe for like prestige miniseries and one-shots. I don't really know.
I guess, because if you know what Marvel Select is now, Marvel Select is like their prestige toy line. Like DC has DC Direct and Marvel has Marvel Select. So it's just kind of weird seeing that on a comic book when I've for so many years known that it was like their prestige toy line.
Yeah. All right. So some of the major players in this story, we have Ben Reilly, who is trying to settle down in Salt Lake City. He gets a teaching job, which I think is interesting. We may confirm or deny this as we move into the Clone Saga. But I don't think Peter Parker has been a teacher yet. I'm not sure. I could be totally wrong on that. But then later on, Peter Parker, one of his more like acclaimed runs, he serves as a teacher as opposed to his usual like photographer job.
No, Peter was a teacher's assistant in the Carrion stuff.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay. Well, then, yeah, point still, Ben Reilly is exercising those academic clone backgrounds, quote unquote clone. And then we have two partners that are cops. We have Jacob Raven, who's a Mormon, and we have Luis Kennedy. And Luis Kennedy is like partially undercover within the mob, and then we'll get to that later. And then we have a bunch of mob figures, and it's like the Tannen family, and they've moved into Salt Lake and made things crime rooted. And what did you? And then there's another major character is more close to Ben is Kane, who Kane is like another clone, and he has like degenerative cancer stuff. And then there's Elizabeth Tyne / Janine Godby. What did you guys think of these two characters that will show up a few more times as we go on?
Janine is such just a stand-in for MJ. It's not even funny.
Yeah, I mean,
I feel the same way.
I mean, that's part of the point is like, you know, Ben is this parallel of Peter, who's like, he has this slightly outcast thing and he's on the run. And then Janine is pretty much a clone of MJ. And I think it's even like, that's like hinted at where they're like, it's almost like when they meet each other, it's like something just felt comfortable, which doesn't make that much sense from Janine's perspective, but whatever. But I don't know, it's kind of interesting. He's got his love interest, who's basically a clone of MJ. What did you guys think of Kane?
I thought I think this storyline should have been longer because his descent into the monster that he becomes is like really fast, and it doesn't give you much reason to like really grasp the severity of what's happening to him.
He also comes completely out of nowhere. It's like you get like a line of like, oh yeah, he was the first clone, he was failed, but like, yeah, he's here. I was like, well, just throwing him in here, so like,
yeah, there's not much backstory, and then his motivation turns very quickly. Like, it's basically implied like, oh, he's stalking Ben, and like maybe he's even like almost watching out for him, and then he gets his degenerative, like his like ultimate spasm, where like he's previously just scarred a bit, and then he turns into like this ridiculous cancer monster, and then like with like a click like that, he's like, oh, now I'm gonna hunt down Ben forever, and like try and kill him and make it so that he's never happy. And so Kane then develops like this weird relationship with Luis Kennedy, the like undercover cop. And at one point, Ben Reilly, he refers to himself as the Road Warrior, going along with his kind of nomad thing. And he's also the Jack Carraway of the clone set, who is one of the beat authors. Also, there's a point, it's in the first issue, where Ben gets his spider sense and then like follows it. Again, another example of the spider sense not being consistent at all and how it works. It's not really like a breadcrumb trail tracking thing. So the first issue, we don't really see Ben as a hero at all. He's just kind of running around trying to do his own thing, and then at the end of the first issue, he's like, "Oh shit, do I have to be a hero?" I like he has a quote at some point. He says, "No place on earth has that mix of high class and low comedy, culture and chaos." And he's referring to New York because even though he's out in Salt Lake, he's still descended from Peter Parker.
It's kind of weird how Ben Reilly like attributes his memories of Peter Parker to memories he has, but like those aren't your memories.
Yeah. I mean, well, are they? But yeah, it's kind of weird. In the sequences where he's at the college, I don't know if you guys noticed, but Ben is wearing like this weird kind of collared shirt where like it doesn't really have like a folding collar. It's almost like if you've ever seen the movie Her. It's like these, I think they're called like Japanese band collars. He's wearing like some weird shirt. I don't know, that stood out to me. So basically the mob, so Jake, before this story happens, has gotten the leader of the mob in jail. And now he's trying to break down the rest of them. And then from behind bars, Vincent Tannen, the leader of the mob, is trying to get back at him. So he murders his wife and then tries to murder his kid and then ends up abducting his kid. Ben saves
he sets up a bomb in their house, and he tries to save the wife, but she dies in the hospital.
Yeah. And so everything by the end of the second issue and the start of the third issue, everything converges in a warehouse where Luis Kennedy is about to, Ben shows up and to like stop things from going down, and then Kane just comes in and beats the shit out of him for no reason. Yeah. And then he leaves. But then, and that's the end of the second issue. And then the beginning of the third issue, Kane is left, but he's looking in, and then he realizes that Luis is not actually undercover. She's actually just like a bad cop and is about to kill Ben. And so then Kane jumps right back in, and like, which then leads to him fighting Ben again. Like Kane's involvement in that warehouse scene is kind of weird. And so Kane realizes he's betrayed, and which I guess is a major part of his motivation to just be an asshole from now on. And then we get Ben and Janine. They reveal who they are to each other. What did you guys think of her backstory?
It just plays into the whole hard-boiled Sin City-esque like narrative they have.
Yeah, I think Nick would enjoy it from a critical perspective. So Janine, it's not Janine Godby. Her real name is Elizabeth Tyne, and she's a murderer. And the person she murdered is her father, who had been molesting her. So she's also on the run, just like Ben, because he's a clone. So he doesn't, if he ever gets in trouble or tied up, there's nothing he can really do. And they resolve that they're going to run off together on the road. And meanwhile, Jake puts together the Janine Godby Elizabeth Tyne connection, and he's a good lawman, so he's going to go after them. And then Kane intersects again because Luis wants to kill Ben Reilly because he knows that she's a bad cop. And Kane pops out and murders her. And he gives her the mark of Cain, which is not explained to us at all.
Yeah, it's the mark of Cain. I'm like, oh, okay. You just used a fancy, famous phrase for something that I don't know why.
If you look at the panels, it looks like they decided that was happening like after they already started drawing that page. because like he picks up the gun and looks like he's gonna shoot the dead body, and then the next panel the gun's on the ground and she's still like kneeling in front of him as if he's like still holding her, and then in the panel after that she has the mark of Cain on her face. So like I don't understand what was going on there. But
I feel like the mark of Cain is after she's dead, but then also there's him. He has her gun. So it's like, why did he grab the gun? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. And then we also get a hint that Reilly tells us in narration that Cain's fingerprints on Luis's gun are going to come back to haunt him.
The gun that he picked up for no reason.
Yeah, and didn't use. So we'll get back to that eventually. We'll have to see. I wonder if that fingerprint story was also published before this, because maybe they're like, oh, we had to throw a gun randomly into this story. And then in the end, basically we get back to the point where we were like 5 pages ago, where Ben and Elizabeth / Janine are running off and they're going to go east. And Ben's narration says, in the end, I lost her, which, without spoiling anything, that's like not really the case. It's not really how it ends out.
I just figured like they just grew apart and she broke up with him or something.
No, it's a little bit more than that. Also, not a huge spoiler, well, sort of. I'll say that she is not dead in current continuity. Like 2018, she's technically alive somewhere in the Marvel universe. So what did you guys, I don't know, do you guys have any other like overall thoughts or specific moments you'd like to highlight?
Nothing, like there's nothing really in this that really sticks out or memorable. It wasn't bad. It wasn't great. It was just mediocre. Like it was fine. Like that's it. It was fine.
Yeah, to me, it only seems to really have effect on Cain's story, because I read they gave out a free comic recently that was about Cain, and it looked back on this and how killing Luis has like affected him. So I guess either like they just decided to publish that to be like, hey, this story actually matters, or no, like it actually does matter.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, nothing really happens. The major beats are we get introduced to Janine, who, again, she's not like a huge player in the scheme of things, and then we get the introduction of Cain. Because like not much time passes here. Like there's a big gap between the last stories that we read and then this, and then there's we assume a gap between this and the start of the actual Clone Saga in the present day. So we don't actually really see much of what Ben Reilly's been doing for like 5 years. It's mostly just character introductions that are going to come in later. But I mean, DeMatteis was perfectly functional in the scripting. Like, it's not bad. And I really enjoyed Romita's art in a lot of panels. All right, so the next episode we're going to do is we're finally moving on to Power and Responsibility, which is the first official crossover arc of the Clone Saga. And I'd like to point out this is kind of like a revision / admitting a goof. In our reading order, we're following the complete epic paperbacks. I forgot that they actually place a bunch of that Mystery Man stuff between Lost Years and Power and Responsibility. And we covered one of those issues a few episodes ago, so we're just going to skip all that. It's not really that important, and we covered the gist of it in that episode. All we're really possibly missing is just a few minor subplot stuff. So I apologize for that slight goof, but in the end, it's not really going to matter. So tune in next time for Power and Responsibility, and finally the start of the Clone Saga.
Finally.
Thanks for watching. All right. Thanks for watching. Peace.